Let's talk about how far surveillance technology has come. Back in the Cold War era, governments justified this growing surveillance in the name of national security. You had wiretaps, bugs, spy planes, all pretty low tech compared to today's standards. And yet, even with those basic tools, there was always that push and pull between keeping people safe and respecting their privacy, you know? Fast forward to today, and it's a whole different landscape. We've moved beyond just listening devices and grainy black and white photographs. Now we're looking at things like facial recognition tech that can scan thousands of faces in mere seconds. Big data analytics that can piece together all your movements, everywhere you've been, everything you've done, from just a handful of clicks or swipes on your phone. And let's not forget devices like smartphones themselves. I mean, apps like Google Maps are now tracking not just where you are, but where you're going, what time you'll get there. It's all so precise. It's almost scary. That kind of tracking would have been unthinkable when I was in the military years ago. We relied on encrypted communications back then, solid systems, but they were nowhere near as interconnected as what we're seeing now. Honestly, today's tech is both fascinating and, well, kind of overwhelming all at the same time. All right, let's get into the real-world applications of all this surveillance tech we were just talking about. Take the NSA's PRISM program, for example. Now, if you're not familiar, PRISM came out of the Snowden leaks back in 2013. It's this massive surveillance initiative that gave the government access to personal data, emails, phone calls, you name it, through big tech companies like Google and Facebook. Sounds invasive, doesn't it? And here's the thing. While some folks argue this kind of monitoring is necessary in the fight against terrorism, others see it as a massive overreach, a complete violation of privacy. I mean, where do we draw the line between safety and becoming, well, a surveillance state? That's the big question we've got to ask. But it doesn't stop with just PRISM. You've also got predictive policing systems, like those used in the US, which supposedly identify crime-prone areas and individuals. Sounds good on the surface, right? But dig a little deeper, and you see how these systems disproportionately target marginalized communities. It's an ugly reality. One where technology that should be neutral ends up reinforcing biases that already exist in society. Now compare that to a place like China, where surveillance is so pervasive, it's basically woven into everyday life. Take their social credit system. Cameras and algorithms tracking you to decide whether you're a good or bad citizen based on your behavior. It's efficient, sure, but at what cost? Freedom? Dignity? These are things I think we, as individuals, can't afford to lose sight of. And my perspective isn't just some theoretical pondering, you know? Growing up in Nigeria and then living in places like the UK and the US, I've seen firsthand how governments handle privacy differently. In Nigeria, there's this deep mistrust of authorities. It gets to the point where people are constantly on guard, cautious about what they say, who's listening. In the UK, the surveillance culture is apparent too, particularly with all these CCTV cameras everywhere. It feels like you're always being watched, but people just, I don't know, accept it. And here in the US, we talk a big game about liberty, but honestly, it seems like we're gradually surrendering some of it in exchange for convenience and security. All right, so where do we go from here? With everything we've talked about, surveillance, privacy, tech overreach, it's clear we're in a bit of a tug of war. But you know, there's a growing pushback. People are waking up to the ways their data is being used or misused, and they're saying, enough is enough. Look at Europe and the GDPR. Now, that's one of the most comprehensive data protection laws out there. It's kind of setting the standard for how governments can and should regulate privacy. Sure, it's not perfect, but it's a step forward, right? Then you've got movements all over the world promoting encryption, stronger safeguards to keep our info private. Tech companies are even jumping in, not because they're saints, but because, well, there's demand for it. People want to feel secure. But here's the crux of it. The conversation around privacy isn't just about laws and technology. It's about values. Take Edward Snowden, for instance. Whatever you think of him, hero or traitor, you can't deny he forced us to confront a crucial question. How much freedom are we willing to trade for security? Those revelations weren't just about surveillance. They were about accountability. Now, let me throw this one at you. Imagine a world where protecting your personal data comes at a cost, a literal one. What if we had to pay to keep our information private? Some of you might say, absolutely, I'd pay whatever it takes. Others might think, well, if I've got nothing to hide, why bother? But think about this. If privacy becomes a commodity, what happens to folks who can't afford it? Does privacy become a privilege instead of a right? That's a future we need to think about, and honestly, it's up to us to decide which path we take. And that's all for today. These are tough questions, no doubt, but they're the kind of questions that shape the world we're creating for ourselves and our kids. On that note, we'll see you next time. Stay safe, stay informed, and take care of your freedom. Cheers.